Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Connecting Conversations. We are absolutely stoked to be joined today by Caron and Clare, the co-founders of C&C Collaborations. Ladies, welcome to Connecting Conversations.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you guys here. I think it might just be so much easier to dive straight in and talk about, just introduce yourselves and just how it is that you met and how you've been able to bring your skills together in the professional capacity you now have as founders of your company.
Fab. Well, Claire, you tell it so well, so I'll let you.
I love that. Let's pass it over to the other.
Did you hear the slight pause? This is such a great example, though, of how polite us women are and how we don't always step in and take that space. I'm going to take that space. I'm going to use my voice. So Caron and I both have our own separate companies. We come from very different backgrounds. I am a psychotherapist. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist. I have a background in public sector mental health and well-being before starting my own company some 5 or 6 years ago. In the mindset space, in the therapy space. And Caron and I met a different situation, but somewhat similar to what you and Ivelka were talking about just before we started. It was a little bit random. Well, it's quite random. We happened to have the same accountant. We used to do weekly calls with this lovely accountant. And we were every week just there hearing each other, kind of going, there's something about Caron that just drew me to her, going, I like what she's all about. I like the way she presents herself. And we just started slowly having more conversations about what we could do and how we could collaborate together and what we could build and grow. We're both very interested in what impact we could have in a really positive way out there in the world. And we focus very much on women in business, women founders, women in the entrepreneurial space and the leadership space. So I bring my mindset and my psychology and therapy background. And Caron, I'll let you explain all the amazing strategy side of things that you do.
Oh, well, thanks so much for that lovely build-up, Claire. So I'm a corporate escapee after almost 20 years. My background is around customer strategy. I worked with large PLC organizations in the construction industry in London, managing their customer remit. Which was really fascinating, but also exciting because it was an industry that wasn't very progressive in terms of digital experiences and looking after the customer, being customer centric. So I kind of had carte blanche and a blank canvas to go and experiment with things like putting time-lapse cameras on building sites so that people from far away could watch the whole 2 years journey before they finally gave us all their money, and exciting things like that. And then after my daughter was born, I stopped and I left because she had multiple food allergies. So there wasn't to be able to continue in a male-dominated industry that you were expected to be in the office 7 to 7 every day was not viable. So I retrained. And 20 years later, went back to studying and qualified as a digital marketer and opened up my own consultancy, as well as developing an app for families with food allergies. And then that led me more into actually supporting mission, purpose-driven founders to help grow and scale their businesses. And so I bring the whole strategic input around your a scalable business model that you can sell one day, marrying an omni-channel customer-centric business and those experiences and leveraging online and offline business models. So yes, as you can tell, it was a match made in heaven when Claire and I met.
I was going to say, I feel like a little bit humbled just listening to this huge list of accolade between the two of you. You guys pack a punch both individually and also together. And I think what strikes me already, and I'm sure Ivelka will agree, is just how wonderful it is to hear two women looking across the pond from one another and the connection of a kindred kind of heart towards something and wanting to get excited about what the other is doing. I think as a generation, I'm beginning to see more of that. And it's interesting. We're in Black History Month right now. And the theme for this year is saluting your sisters. And the two of you are embodying that, even though, you're outside of potentially that community. But to hear more women coming together. Like, I can see what you're doing. How can I support that? How can we join forces rather than I need to compete? Does that make sense? What are your thoughts about that? Like, it sounds like you've evaded all of that nonsense, and I love that.
We got no time for that kind of nonsense. Absolutely. And I think that's something I certainly see in Caron, and I hope I embody that as well, is that the more we can cheer each other on and champion each other, the further we can all go. And for me, the online space has been absolutely wonderful for connecting with women. And I make a real point just to be in communities where that's the ethos, that's the culture. Is about women championing women. And I think from the very get-go, I've sought out mentors and people that can help me on my journey, who are women as well. And that's a priority of value I think both Caron and I hold really strongly. And we can see it in both of you guys as well with what you're creating. When we combine forces, we are so powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I agree.
And I think it's so, I totally agree. And I think it's so important that at times when you feel like you're the only one doing it, there is someone out there who can help you elevate that and take you on to that next leap. Because there are people, we all know we're not an expert in everything, and we will have to rely on someone at some point in your career, your entrepreneurship world, to really help bring that another level of expertise, that another lens to look at. And it's only until then you realize, oh my goodness, there is a world full of other amazing women who you can journey with. And I tell Carla time and time again, she's stuck with me for life, whether we're in business or not. She is stuck and she's not going anywhere. And I think it's so important. Carla talked about competing, and there's still a large sentiment about women competing with one another. But when you bypass that and you build friendship, you build genuine relationship. And I think personally, that's where a lot of businesses can continue to scale. A lot of female-owned businesses in particular can really elevate something. I'm going to be slightly hesitant or conscious in saying this, but I guess something that men don't leverage as much as women.
Where my head went to exactly is that naturally, as women, we are connectors, and Caron is a super connector like no one I've ever met before. It's one of her absolute superpowers. But like in our day-to-day lives, we connect, we support each other, relationships matter. And yet somehow this got lost a bit in the work world, and I think probably my theory would be that we were pitched in a world where there wasn't so much space for us. So we ended up being pitted against each other. And I think there is a real shift that I see of opening it up for this collaborating, not competing. And I find it really exciting. And to me, it makes all the difference, because it's so much more fun when you can do this with other people. And Caron certainly fills in the gaps that I've got. I look to other women to learn the bits that I don't know, exactly like you said, Evelka. We need each other to do that, and it's a much more enjoyable experience.
It
100%.
Yeah. And then one of the things that really drew Clare and I together, when we compared notes afterwards, is that we came from traditional corporate or institutional backgrounds where there was a ceiling that we reached and we could not go any further, and there just wasn't that seat at the table. So we came, and what really drew us together as a team was actually, we're happy to get those tools out and get dirty and down and carve our own table and make it a table will just extend continually, inviting more and more people to come and sit with us and join and have those conversations and build each other up. And I strongly believe in the power of that collective hive mind, because like you were talking about the connecting, those conversations, how they spark the ideas and the innovation and the solutions that didn't exist before, all of a sudden you're creating an exciting future ahead of you.
I love that so much. And I love the very transparent kind of way that you guys have described your experiences of kind of the corporate spaces that you occupied and that ceiling that you encountered. And I just want to go back a little bit. Before we started recording, we were speaking about how I think particularly this generation, it's exciting because we see there is so much endless opportunity now. We've got women breaking boundaries, smashing glass ceilings, but at the same breath, there is a generation of us kind of dangling a middle line between, we come from an era where we are taught from literally perhaps our mothers and our grandmothers' generation about traditional roles and spaces that women occupy. But now we're also balancing trying to have capacity to contain and move forward in a new world that is saying you need to be able to do more than this. Don't get stuck behind just those traditional roles. But there's the expectation and the pull and push between both of those types of mindsets. How have you guys found that navigating, particularly that you were in corporate spaces? How did you find that? Please feel free to answer from both of your perspectives.
Well, I came from a public sector background, so organizational hierarchies, but in a different sense from the corporate. So it was a little bit different from my experience. It was, there were a lot of women. I worked in social work, in mental health teams. I used to run a mental health and wellbeing service at a university in London. So there was opportunity there. I think maybe the glass ceiling was a bit different. I think there was definitely a glass ceiling still. But what I felt from my personal experience was, in order to move up and do career progression, I had to somehow adapt into, I don't know, for ease of use, a kind of more male model that wasn't what I wanted. And like Caron, I have a young daughter. When I was living abroad when I had her, and when I came back with the baby, I was like, what am I going to do? I don't want to go back into this structure that feels too rigid for me. I don't want to have to go up the management ladder and start to behave in a way, certainly in the places I was working in, which didn't sit well with my integrity, to be quite frank. I was like, I'm not prepared to change my values that much. So what can I create instead? But I do think we are in that bind, and COVID was really interesting in the studies they did for when everybody was working from home, and they looked at how did we break down the jobs that were done at home, the amount of hours that men versus women did on all the domestic things when we were both everyone was at home working, and the disparity was just huge. So this to me is the challenge, is how do we create something so we can build what we want? Like Caron said, we can carve our own table, but there needs to be systemic change going on around us. And I think it's happening, but it's slow moving. And I'm more hopeful, I hope, for the generations coming up behind me. But I can certainly see that's been a whole negotiation that's gone on within my family about how do we distribute the responsibilities for things and the mental headspace for holding things. So it's these sort of multi-layered shifts that we're looking at that need to go on, and there's no quick easy answer, but it's chipping away at it, and it's having conversations like you women are creating that are so important to get this out there, to keep talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you hit on the head there, Claire, is all around this whole shift in the whole domestic revolution, where, like you said, Carla, we're expected to be crushing it at work, crushing it at home, everything. It is this balancing act. But, there is this silent revolt going on about, actually, there is so much that I can take, and my capacity is at that point, there is no more. So there does need to be that more grown-up partnership to be able to support each other's growth and ambitions for those that are in couples. And then there is, when you don't have that partner to support you at home, you're still expected to do all the things anyway. So our ability to multitask is phenomenal, and there is so much that we can carry as a load, but there is a compromise somewhere, and that really sits with me. But looking at the systemic change, and I'm so passionate about empowering women in leadership and business and changing the face of what that landscape looks like. But I do feel like there's been progress, but we've still got a long way to go. Even as of now, only 9% of CEOs in the FTSE 100 are females. And you break that down even further, only 0.2% come from other minority backgrounds. So, the programs are failing because there was a big push and drive to have 25% female diverse CEOs in the FTSE 100 by 2025, and they're only at 9%, and it's predominantly white women. So what's actually changed, and where is that progress? So there needs to be buy-in all around to enable that change to take place.
I mean, those figures are staggering, really, aren't they? And I think we feel that we're in a very empowered space, particularly living in the Western world. We have so much, supposed freedoms of, aspiration and opportunity. But when you hear figures like that, it really puts a sobering halt on, actually, where are we? In your view, ladies, like what do you think needs to change? That clearly this is coming from something, we've mentioned the word already, systemic, but is there something else that you've identified in your journey as champions for women's equity in leadership and in entrepreneurship? What's been some of the things you've come across, like maybe this is where the weaknesses are, those are the things that need to be challenged? Has there been specific things that you've come along to see, like perhaps we need to address that to see this outcome that we're kind of all hoping and aspiring for?
There is a big issue when we look at the kind of issues like Caron just said, where we've got these figures that are put out there. We want X amount of these kind of roles to be filled by these kinds of peoples, and it becomes a bit of a lip service. And I love that you use the word equity when you talk about the diversity inclusion that you promote. Because equity to me means that there is a buy-in, there's a belief in it. It's not just about getting a seat at that table. It's about your voice being welcomed and valued and respected and actually wanted there. So we need more than just that space being opened up. We need the contributions or the perspectives or the issues that come up for women and what are the barriers that come in the way to actually be seen as important and relevant, and with a real desire to change it and shift it. So you look at all the work that's going on around flexible working and the laws that are being pushed through, maybe lots by Anna Whitehouse, Mother Pucker, who's doing a huge amount of work online and offline around campaigning for this. But the resistance to this idea of change and of having some flexibility that would mean that predominantly women, and then also women who happen to be parents, can come and can feel like they can contribute and succeed and grow within their careers. I think too often we see that women now are stepping out of careers because it's just not tenable when they reach a certain point or want to have a family, for instance. And we're losing so much talent from the workplace. So it's on the one hand, I think, great, these women are going and creating their own, they're carving their own table, they're creating their own opportunities, and that's real empowerment. But it would also be nice if that was a choice rather than a necessity, that there was also that same opportunity for people within organizations. So for me, I think this is a male issue. I think this is something that needs to be looked at. It's not necessarily for us always to change as the women. It's for the men to step in and say, actually, there is space for some flexible thinking here, from some incorporating other people's perspectives and experiences and valuing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from my perspective, thinking about the female founders who go and forge their own path and create a solution that didn't exist before, I think it's providing more support in terms of funding and financial support. Clare and I were talking about, we represent a demographic of women over 40 who are the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in the UK, but the least accessible to funding. Wow. So it's a completely skewed statistic. So I think in order to change, we need to focus on getting rid of those challenges around gender bias, the lack of networks, the industry bias, pitching challenges, looking at pay gaps, and bring those into conversation and focus that, as a collective groups, we look at what are those funding routes that going to support that entrepreneurial spirit, and bring into focus more things like gender lens investing, where we're specifically targeting female-run businesses. I've been on, I love a good program, and I love a mentoring program. So I can't even tell you how many I've been on. And some really great ones that have been spearheaded as part of their CSR agenda with some very well-known financial institutions. every single time these programs are about teaching you how to business. How do you do the practicalities? But not once is there any investment in, okay, so how do we invest in you? How do we open up opportunities for funding to ensure that your solution that you've got there becomes a scalable, really big impact? You could be the next unicorn. That is where change really needs to happen. And otherwise we're just cheerleaders on the sideline cheering each other on, and nothing actually changes. So
I think you raised like some really, really valid points there. I think both it's not something that I think women, it's your job to go and fix it. And I think, Caron, you really shone a very realistic truth on it. This is something, it's not just about women, it's actually about everyone. Because at the end of the day, as much as we are talking about, we are in the business of altering, if not disrupting, historically male-dominated spaces, particularly in entrepreneurship and corporate world. It's in order for that space to be created, we need to have the buy-in of the collaboration of the fact that, you know, those that have historically held that space with no question, it's never been an issue of where they belong. That's like, what are you doing to adjust and be flexible to make the space more comfortable and inviting and embracive to those coming in? Like, for example, like you said, women that have got different contexts, some come in as mothers. Is there space for us still to be seen in our value, not just because you have a child now, it's going to be one or the other? And I love that you actually raised that, because that's so important. Because currently, if we're to look at the entrepreneurship or corporate landscape right now, it doesn't quite look as though it is only one or the other. If I decide that I would like to, invest in my family, and again, I think this also is what feeds into negative impressions for women that choose to. That is an incredibly important role. This is where we are, raising tomorrow's leaders and children. If our children are broken, we don't have a good society tomorrow. So we need those types of parents that see it as such a very sacred and have a reverence towards the responsibility of that. But why, like you say, does it have to be at the cost of I'm now excluded from still being able to participate and bring value outside of even that sphere? And I think, that's a big ongoing question. We don't have all the answers now. And like you say, Caron, we can see that there's stuff that there's potentially that can be done to disrupt this and to shift this for good impact and positive change of inclusion of women. But it does require, it takes money to make the world go round. It takes that funding, action spaces. What have we facilitated creating education opportunities for people to learn about how to do this within companies, their infrastructure? How are we doing that in terms of our policy? How are we doing that in terms of the work environments and kind of cultures that we're building there? I feel, Evelka, you've been someone who's been in the D&I space as a specialist for a long time. And I guess D&I is fairly new in terms of this is a hot topic. It's a hot kind of sphere to be involved in. But from your experience, what has that been like as an ethnic woman, as someone who specializes in something? It feels like actually you get a lane of your own almost, because it is an evolving kind of field. What has been your experience with that?
I think my experience and kind of my exposure to the corporate world has been quite varied, I have to say. There are some organizations that I have worked with in the past where I definitely felt like I could elevate and progress and level up in order to reach spaces of ultimate impact. And then there are other organizations and environments I've been in that were a little bit reductive, and it kind of set me backwards. But I think for me, I'm a huge advocate for, similar to you all, female empowerment. But I guess female empowerment from those on the other side of things, for the younger generation, for the young girls and young women growing up and being in spaces for either the first or second or third time, who perhaps don't have the years of experience as our counterparts have, but are being, I guess, disadvantaged. One, because they're a woman, and 2, because of their age. It's, on my end of the spectrum, it's not about, okay, I'm ready to have a family, and we come to that later on. But I think for late 20s, early 30s, perhaps, it's all about sustaining and building a career for yourself. And I was having conversations with some other women, and we both agreed that whilst we're on different ends of the spectrum, she very much has a family and has to be a provider, and having to work part-time because of the different requirements and responsibilities she has. But then on me, whereas I have, I guess, more time and still not being able to gain that opportunity because I don't have the years of experience. So it's like you're kind of stuck in a space where you're neither that, you're neither this. So how do you actually progress? So, I'm not at that end where I have a responsibility of a family, but at the same time, I'm at the space where I can build a career, but yet there are no opportunities, or there's no resources available for me to do that, because it certainly feels like a stopgap. So I think for me, I'm advocating for young women within corporate and entrepreneurship space to, gain access to resources, to funding, as you said, Caron, to different opportunities, to growth plans in corporate organizations. And I think we're often overlooked. A lot of companies say you have a development plan, but when you actually sit down and in reality, how far does that development plan go? Like how much do you really want to invest in me as an individual who, in the next 5-10 years, whatever it may be, I can be at the top, or I can be supporting you in advancing another area of your business to further scale. And I think there is very much a limited or small mindset in a lot of companies where they think they're the only ones who will ever be at the top. And not allowing space, or not even allowing access to even take a glimpse of that space to learn. And I think there are organizations who are doing it well in terms of reverse mentoring. But again, I still feel like there's a lack of investment even in that in itself. But I think we can definitely do a lot more on that end of the spectrum. I don't know, what are your thoughts? Because I'm coming from the complete end.
That's an important thing to raise, I think. And if we're going to move forward all together, we do need to acknowledge these are what the challenges are amongst women in general. It's not linear, it's not homogenous, and it's really not a one size that fits all. And in order for it to be effective, we have to have the awareness that, for example, you might be at like you said, the spectrum where you represent a generation that is up and coming, and we represent a generation that we have some experience, but we've been perhaps in the struggle in terms of we need to break some stereotypes of our place and our validity within these places in the first place. But actually, we need you and you need us to move forward so that there is a space for everybody to feel that they can fulfill that potential. I think my comment would be like, and again, this would incorporate, I think some of the things have already been kind of flown around it, which has been amazing in terms of, I think this goes back to how it is that actually we found ourselves coming together in the first place, right? It was through the element of we're talking about it. We are making real connections and real genuine friendships, not because what can I get from you as a transactional engagement, but genuinely I'm passionate about what you're doing. I want to see like, what does that look like where you are? I think when we speak about, how certainly Ivalka and I came together, becoming and forging Cohesia Connect, it was a synergy of hearts that really care about something purpose-driven that Caron was speaking about earlier. And recognizing she's from a different generation than I am, and my background and specialisms are different, but together we know that this will actually achieve what we need to, because nobody's an island. What would you ladies say in terms of how can we promote that more, that this is actually the way forward and not something else in terms of I just need to make it on my own? Or do you know what I mean? What are your thoughts towards that in terms of how can we get everybody to that mindset that this is what it's going to take for us to get forward together?
I think the energy that's being brought to all of this, and the point you just made, Carla, about we're here talking to each other because we are genuinely interested in what each other has to say, and it's valued. And that just creates this whole momentum and energy of its own. And it's about putting that out there, in bigger and bigger platforms, and using your voice. I was listening to a talk that Doreen Lawrence gave. It was up on the Black History Month's website, and I went in to have a little look at what all the different amazing women that are being showcased, and Doreen Lawrence is one of them. And I watched the talk she gave, and she talked about moving from having a quiet voice to a challenging voice. And I just thought that was absolutely lovely. And it's about doing that, isn't it? It's not about having conflict necessarily, although, you know, that is a way. But for me, it's what we're doing here is about having that challenging voice and a genuine buy-in of interest and value into what each other is saying. And I think when we go from always this very kind of male-female model, we also do a disservice to the men out there who, if we go back to the family model, which I know is just one element of it all, but you know, there's tons of men that are missing out and don't want to be. We've got to start valuing the contributions that women bring on an equal footing, and not seeing this as that. If we can start shifting this dialogue, if we can look at the language we use, stop calling women boss babes and fempreneurs. Like, you know, we're women who are leaders. We are women who are bosses. We are just bosses. Like, let's just, it does us a disservice, doesn't it? It reduces us. It diminishes. But also, I think there's such power in coming forward and assuming that there are men out there that feel the same and that would equally value this conversation and listen to this conversation right now that we're having. And that's what we need to tap into and build more of, and harness that energy, because that's where we're going to get a ripple and a movement going from both sides. And that feels exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to build on that as well, Claire, I think that there's such power in intergenerational learning and connections. You know, we've got the older generations in the workplace and in business and in life that they've got the war wounds and the scars, and we've been through it. And so there's, you know, so there's so much wisdom to tap into from that experience without having to go through that yourselves. And, you know, and then really valuing the younger generations well, and being digital first, and this whole massive shift in digitization that goes way beyond the previous generation's capabilities, and there's a fear. So, you know, when you start to marry what all the parties can bring together, it's really exciting. But I think, you know, going back to how can we start challenging this as early as possible? And I think it comes into, for those of us that are raising children or have influence on children in our lives, whether they're our nieces and nephews. And, you know, I think it's about supporting children from a very young age and supporting young, strong, confident girls. You know, I've got a young child. She is 6 going on 16. She's just fabulous. She has just got so much energy, and she's curious, and, you know, I call her more boy than girl because she's hanging off bars and trees and things. I don't want her to lose that essence of that adventurous spirit. And I was listening to this fantastic podcast from Dr. Mary Ann Baker, a child psychologist, about raising gutsy girls. And she was saying that, you know, from the age of 8, girls, we're just predispositioned that our confidence levels drop by 80%. Like, we're on a par with boys until about 6, 8, then all of a sudden it drops. And there's this having to be more conscious about the messaging that we're putting forward to our young girls, calling them the good girl, and, you know, be quiet, be a good girl, and, you know, and passing on like the domestic roles to them and teaching them. You know, I think that there's disruption in the home that needs to happen because we've got to, what we learn as children is what we take and carry with us, and that hangover. And I think that's a part of what we carry as women, as adults, the whole good girl, put up, shut up, back in your box, as opposed to, no, I haven't as much a right to take up space, and my voice deserves to be heard. And that's where Claire and I really, that's what drives us, is to bring that out in women that are just fabulous and amazing, but for some reason or another, they've been overlooked. They feel unseen. So they kind of shift into the background whilst other people get to take the limelight. But no, it's, you know, so that's where we combine that growth mindset and your growth strategy to really just challenge that trajectory.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go for it, Volker.
No, sorry. I was just kind of thinking as you were talking, Caron, around that lack of confidence. And, you know, a lot of my experience really derived from seeing the different behaviors within the recruitment space. And there are stats within the recruitment space, you know, it takes about almost up to 8 times for a woman to be convinced of a particular job. And then when she does apply to it, you know, she only applies to it when it's about almost 100% of the fact that she knows that she can do it. On the other hand, men only apply to jobs even if they meet 50, 60%. Their confidence is and eager is over the top. And they're just like, yeah, I can do that. Sure. And it takes a lot more conversation, a lot more kind of motivation to encourage that woman. And I speak to a lot of women within my roles and, you know, in the past. And because I navigated the recruitment space, I had a lot of candid conversations as to why are you not applying? What are you scared of? You know, this is how you can frame yourself. Don't be afraid to say that you've done X, Y, and Z. You know, don't be afraid to put that you've worked in so-and-so place. You know, speak your truth, be authentic, showcase that as best as you can in a written format. And there is still largely, I went to the UK Black Business Show just last week, and I met so many incredible Black women, and they just have this, I think it was more of a fear of, how do I go beyond this? Like, how can I, you know, present myself in a certain way? And there was one particular woman, she was just like, you know, I feel like I can get past all of that, but how can I get an interview? Like, what behaviors do I need to showcase? I think I've done my job description, my CV, resume to the T, but I'm just struggling to get to those in-person conversations, those interviews, those next stages in the recruitment process. And I think one, as we've all have demonstrated and discussed, there is a systemic issue happening at play, and that goes right to how organizations recruit and how they attract. But there's more as to, even when they do get to spaces of interview, shortlist, offer, you know, what behaviors are the company, you know, portraying that either one turns off a female candidate from even continuing the process, or two, as Claire said, it's kind of, they do it out of necessity rather than, you know, they haven't a choice. They have to do it because they need to bring home money for the family, for, you know, to live, and so on and so forth. And I think for women, there is a lot more kind of consideration of the wider things at play, that bigger picture, that bigger focus as to, okay, if I don't get this job, if I don't navigate this space, you know, there are other people, my dependents, my family, who's counting on me to provide, to set an example for, to be a role model, will be affected. I don't think men carry around that that burden, that kind of cloud.
I love that you've raised.
Do?
Absolutely, I love that you've raised it, Evelk, and I think this ties in quite well with what Caron was talking about. And I think what we're speaking about and what we're referring to is the places of origin of culture, and whether that's family culture or even, you know, ethnic culture in society. Because my husband and I are both firstborns, but my version of being a firstborn, he's very much like, our firstborn rights. His is very much based on it. I'm entitled. I will go and do something first. Nobody questions my ability and freedom to figure stuff out on my own. As a firstborn, in my family culture particularly, a lot of it was responsibility focused. And I think, Caron, you're absolutely, this is where my confidence is always in the space, or it has been historically, if we look at it and we really examine ourselves. And this goes, I think, ties in quite well with Evelka's description of meeting and hearing the narratives of other people that she's come across, is there's a second guessing of, it's, my confidence is not just about me. My confidence actually has to go through this major filtering of all of these other hoops to jump through before I see my value as being in the right place at the right time. And I've also heard men who really advocate women within the business world, and they're in senior positions. They've spoken about how it is that when they have seen women who come from a particular cultural backgrounds where actually it's not appropriate for them to speak in a board meeting room because they don't speak in front of men. That is another complex issue to be navigating. And with the value that they should be bringing and kind of like the essence that they bring in, which would be so important for the next strategy for the success of a business, is reliant on them. But because of cultural conflicts, potentially, I think that might be a better word. And these tensions happening all the time, it helps us to understand that actually there is so much here at play. And it needs a different kind of unpacking and sensitive approach, but it still needs to be done. How do we break out of that so that this voice is heard, unshackled, if I'm going to say, but all of these other additional things? I don't know if you have any answers, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a double whammy, isn't it? Like you're both saying, there's the internal conditioning that we soak up and carry around, and there's going to be some pretty universal experiences as women, and then some very specific cultural experiences, whether that's the background from which you come or your specific family culture. Like there's so many different layers of it, so we're struggling with all of that, and that's a huge thing that I see in the women I work with, is unpicking and undoing that social conditioning. But then, Ivelka, you're so right, there needs to be an experience on the other end of that when you do go and apply for that job that you're not 100% certain you hit the criteria for. And that piece of research was so interesting to read about the difference between men and women, and when we'll go for things versus when we hold back. But when we do put ourselves out there, when we do step out of that comfort zone, when we do get our voice to be bigger and to use it, so much of what we then carry on to do or not do will be determined by the experience we have, or the what we get back at us. So if time and time again we get a negative experience, or we get knocked back, or we get the experience that our voice isn't welcomed, and our views aren't welcomed, then we're sort of fighting against the tide, swimming against the tide a lot of the time. So we need this shift to happen from all sides, and there isn't an easy answer. One thing we can do is that idea of self-determination up to a point where we can go away today and start looking at that inner dialogue, those blueprints for living that we've been given, and what we want to carry on with and what we want to reject, and what we can do within ourselves, because we can't control what everyone else is doing. We don't know how long that's going to take for everyone else to get up to speed, but we can start right now today on questioning that inner voice that tells us we shouldn't do something, we can't do something, we got to please everybody, we can't rock the boat, we got to stay small and quiet. And I see it, Caron's so right, I see it in my daughter. I have a 9-year-old and who is feisty as hell, and at school she prides herself on being very well behaved, which I can totally understand why that's taught. It serves a purpose when you've got hundreds of kids in a school together, but girls carry this mantle and it goes with them throughout life. And at her school, they have a junior leadership team that's it mirrors the senior leadership team. And it's the boys that go for it on the whole. There are girls in it as well, but in my daughter's class, it is usually the boys that are putting themselves forward. So it's starting so young, of girls not seeing themselves as either having the confidence to get out and do that, or seeing themselves as seeing it as possible, seeing themselves as having a place at that table. And we have to role model this. I think the answer is in what we do for the generation coming up behind us, whether that's young women or young girls, and how we teach them and role model. And I had a conversation with my daughter about why she wasn't putting herself forward if she wanted to, and she did want to, but she didn't feel confident enough. And I sat there and had to have a little word with myself and go, if she doesn't see her mum doing these things, I'm not going to do it. So I put myself forward for parent governor and got it, and showed her, like, we can do this. There's space there. You just have to put yourself forward and keep going. And I think if that's one thing that we can do, and that's to inspire girls coming up behind us and show them that, they can have a place at the table. It might be messy sometimes. It might not always be a comfortable seat, but we can take that seat, because no one's going to sit there and just hand it to us, sadly. And I'm aware that I'm sitting here as a white woman talking, who has disadvantages and barriers, but I also have a position of privilege that makes it maybe a little bit easier for me to get in that door. So I think my job is to then try and get in there and hold the door open wider for everyone else to come through. And that's a responsibility that we have.
Amazing. No, that sounds great. And I think, you've done such a good job in showcasing to your daughter that, look, I can do it too. I went for a position. Come on, you have the confidence to do it. And I think it's really important to continue to inspire and be our role models for young girls. I try to do it with my younger sister. She's 18 and she's more like going on 30 at this rate. But she has her challenges in terms of what spaces can I occupy. She wanted to go into engineering, plumbing. And I remember when she sat down and talked about it in class, bearing in mind it was I think there was only 3 girls in her class at the time, and she was the only Black girl, saying that she wants to do this. And guys were just like, no, you will never be able to do that. You can't. And I think there is such a sentiment that, it goes beyond what happens in school, but what happens and conversations are happening at home, that we're teaching our young men and our young boys as to what roles they can play, especially in terms of how they interact and engage with women and girls. There is such a broader conversation in that, and how we raise our young men to be advocates and to create space for their counterparts and for women. And that's such an important thing. I was in a relationship for a number of years, and he came from a family of only brothers, and I have a sister. And even in our interaction with our families, it was so different. Like, I would try to be a role model for my sister and be like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to help that. I'm going to help my sister. And he, on the other hand, would be like, oh, they'll figure it out. I don't have to do that. That's my mom's job. And I'm just sitting there like, but you're the older one. You're the eldest. What are you doing?
It's a different lived experience, isn't it? It's a different lived experience. And you're so right. You can't control what reaction your sister's going to get. What we can do, though, is try to give and build a foundation of rock solid self-belief at home and in friendship groups, and that allows them to become not that quiet voice, but that challenging voice. So this is the way we're going to trailblaze through. And it can be on such small things, like going for a parent governor position is hardly, CEO of a big company, but it doesn't matter. It's like there are day-to-day opportunities to role model stepping into some sort of leadership, or not accepting something as it stands if it feels wrong to you. And that to me then is exciting, because there's so many micro opportunities that we can take, as well as looking to the big, really inspirational women out there doing amazing things. It's those day-to-day role models that are so powerful as well.
Yeah. Definitely. 100%. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's so key, Claire, because especially if we think in digital first, we take a lot of cues from what we see online and social media. And there is that whole notion of learning from celebritized entrepreneurs. Whereas, that's filtered versions. We don't know the whole production and everything that goes on to get into that place, and how much of it is actually true. There's just been something uncovered on LinkedIn with the top 100 LinkedIn voices that, 80% of them, they've been banned from LinkedIn because they were literally harvesting engagement pods and commenting to make them appear to be something that they weren't. Wow. So how much of it is smoke and mirrors out there? But what Claire was really touching on about is, let's look locally. Who are our local role models and heroes in our community? And that's where we start to affect change, by actually looking and seeing who's in front of us and who do we impact around us in a positive way, that we can role model and set as examples to learn from, and to cultivate this whole environment of support and empowerment, without having to feel like, oh, well, having to look at these influences and affluences that are so far removed from our actual reality.
Yeah, I think that is such a key thing there. It's really looking to, where can we start now? It doesn't have to be as wide or as grand as a way in which to actually start the steps towards impacting this form of change that we want to see. And I think that's such a perfect way to, I think, end this incredible conversation. I feel we can go on continuously. I know we'll have a great time talking about it, but I've just been so encouraged by, I think what undergirds everything that's been said today is there's a lot of hope in the atmosphere. We're not, I think, putting our heads in the sand, we're not unaware or naive to what the challenges are. But I think what I am so encouraged by this conversation, and particularly by the stories of both Clare and Caron and your partnership and your collaboration, is that we're in a generation now, we're in a season now and an era now where women are looking to partner together for the amplification for change. There's work to be done, but there is still so much hope and excitement and enrichment in this process. And I'm here for the ride. So a huge thank you to both Clare and Caron for joining us again on Connecting Conversations. Please connect with them on their LinkedIn. I will have their details as well, in ways to connect with them and their businesses. It'll be great to see us all continuing to support one another. Thank you, ladies, for being with us today. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Carla. Thank you, Velka. That was absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you. We'll see you on the other side.